Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boxing fans around the world. Just before I decide whether I'm going to order pizza or not, I figured I would go ahead and do this week's rundown, starting with today, because there's actually a big fight happening on ESPN. It's going to be happening in approximately 5 hours from now. It's out in New York at the Turning Stone Casino. This is Joe Smith versus Steve Geffrard. And if you're like, what? I thought it was Joe Smith versus Callum Johnson. It was supposed to be Joe Smith versus Callum Johnson. Callum Johnson, of course, had to withdraw because he caught COVID, as I understand it. And so there was a late replace, and Steve Geffrard stepped in. Now, if you're like, who? Don't feel bad because that's what I thought as well. I knew nothing about this guy, and I, to this date, don't know anything about him, but he appears to be a regional fighter largely. He's been highly decorated on the regional side. Does not look to have held any world championship gold. He's lost twice. In the face off with this dude, though, I just I looked at him and I'm like, it's like Naseem Hamed versus Saeed Lawal all over again. This guy is deer in the headlights. He's there to get a check. He hasn't even really spoken out about the fight, I don't think. And great that he stepped in on short notice to kind of salvage the fight, and that's cool. But I'm really concerned about seeing somebody like him stepping in against somebody like Joe Smith. And, I don't highly rate Joe Smith either, but at the same time, Joe Smith he's a solid fighter. He's a well-regarded fighter. He's the WBO champion at light heavyweight, I believe. So it's not that he's, a bum. Certainly not. I just feel like this guy here with Steve Geffrard, he's sacrificial lamb. And he lost twice. He did, and people felt like he should hang it up after he lost. And the guys that he lost with, he should not have lost with. We're talking bums. We're talking straight bums. Beat this dude. If you want to look at his record, go ahead, because he lost to bums. Bottom line. So if you see the face off between Joe Smith and Steve Geffrard, it's like this guy Geffrard has no business in the ring with somebody like Joe Smith. I don't see he has any chance whatsoever. And it's a terrible fight for Joe Smith. It's not his fault because Callum caught COVID and then Callum started talking off to the side because Callum Johnson really wanted that fight. So I don't. All I can say is it is what it is. It's how it's going to be. That's going to happen again in roughly about 5 hours from now, out there in New York. I wouldn't put too much into the fight, frankly, because it's horrible. It's not a good opponent for Joe Smith, and again, it's not the first time. And Joe Smith's had a hard time of it because I believe this is the second time his opponent has had to be changed because of a COVID finding. I think in 2021 he was supposed to fight somebody as well, and that opponent pulled out as well. So I don't know on this one, but that's going to be our night of fight tonight. Is on ESPN in about 5 hours. Joe Smith fighting against Steve Geffrard, and then there's going to be a co-main, and it's on the featherweight. So that was light heavyweight that I just talked about. Featherweight's going to be two guys I never heard of, Abraham Nova and William Encarnacion. Sorry. I've never heard of either guy. I do follow featherweights to some degree, but I've never heard of either guy. So it's ESPN, so it doesn't surprise me that it's a terrible card, but if you're interested in fighting, then that would be what you got up on deck right now. The next fight's going to be next weekend. That's going to be the return of Mr. Gary Russell Jr., and he's fighting Mark Maxayo. And of course, Maxayo is not highly regarded either, but he's certainly not a bum. So I expect that Russell will be tested in that fight just because Maxayo's there to come. That's on Showtime. That's out in New Jersey and Atlantic City, which used to be the boxing mecca and then was on a decline. I'm glad to see fights being booked out there again because to me it seemed like the best fights were in New Jersey, in Atlantic City back in the days, in the Don King days. And it just, for whatever reason, regulations or whatever, it seemed to decline. But that's happening next weekend. So January 22nd, as I record this. And then the weekend after that's going to be Ilunga Makabu. And of course, that's the guy that people are talking about will be fighting Canelo. But he has to get past, I believe it's his mandatory, which is Tiabaso Moshungu. And I don't rate either guy. I know people are giving Canelo flack for fighting Makabu, saying he's a weak champion. Makabu's not a weak champion. Is he the weakest of the division? Maybe, but it's a weak division in general. I'm going to give Canelo a pass because he's going for legacy. He's going for history. That's what he wants. He's not concerned with the naysayers, and I credit him for that. That same weekend, we're going to see Robson Conceição, or Conseco, sorry, and then Xavier Martinez, and that's out in Oklahoma. That's on ESPN as well. That's super featherweight. I'm somewhat aware of both guys. I'll cover that one come time next, probably Friday, this coming Friday. I'll cover that fight because I'm interested in this one and its outcome. And then the week following that, we got Chris Eubank Jr. making a return to the ring. He's going against Liam Williams. That's a grudge match on Sky Sports out in Cardiff, Wales. And then that same weekend, we see the return of Keith Once Upon a Time Thurman fighting Mario Barrios on Fox out in Las Vegas. And then Jesse Vargas is returning, and he's fighting Liam Smith. And this is at 154. So February 5th is going to be that really exciting, I think, weekend where we're going to see some possible upsets, because I can see Liam Williams possibly upsetting Chris Eubank Jr. Do I think it'll happen? It's possible. Probability? Probably low, but it's possible. And Keith, like I said, I'm leaning towards Barrios because I just think Keith's head's not in the game anymore. I could be wrong, but I don't see it. And then as far as Jesse Vargas, I think he's a warrior. He comes to fight, and Liam Smith's not a tough competitor compared to Jesse. That's on the zone, by the way, in Arizona. But I just think Jesse Vargas is on the way out. He's been in some wars. He's had some tough fights, and he might be demoralized. He's taken some losses back to back, and so hopefully we see him step up. Some other returns that are going to be happening in 2022. Just FYI, keep it on the top of the list. Danny Jacobs is going to be back in the ring. He's fighting on DAZN in London. This is in February. This is 168, and that's going to be out in London. Of course, the grudge match between Amir Khan and Kell Brook is also in February in Manchester, in the Manchester Arena. Jaime Munguia, he's making a return. The zone that's in Tijuana, Mexico. Of course, not unification, but the fight for the unified title. Josh Taylor is fighting Jack Catterall, who is his mandatory. That's in Glasgow, Scotland, I believe. On Sky Sports. Jose Ramirez and Jose Pedraza may be rescheduled. There are chats that fight may not actually happen as planned, so it's kind of still up in the air. But as of right now, it's still on deck for March in California. Juan Francisco Estrada versus Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. That's scheduled for San Diego, California on DAZN in March. That's for titles for WBC franchise title, which, of course, if you remember, WBC said that the franchise was never to be defended. And, of course, those rules are out the window when it's a high-profile fight as this one, and it's with Canelo and then Teofimo. So this is allegedly for the franchise super flyweight title WBC in March. That, of course, I believe is a trilogy fight. I'm sure it's a follow-on, but I believe it's a trilogy fight. And then the winner is supposedly going to be fighting the winner of Srisaket Sorongvijay and Carlos Cuadras. That's kind of what's in the air. But, of course, you still got others like Ancajas and others that are kind of talking about being in the mix. Donaire is talking about going down to be in the mix. Super flyweight, I'm telling you, like I said before, is going to be jumping. I'm thinking 2022 is going to be the year of the lower weight divisions and not the heavyweights. That's my gut. Virgil Ortiz is back in action in March on DAZN. And then Josh Warrington, he's also fighting out in Leeds in March. That's all we know as of right now. It's the first quarter of the year. Fights that we believe are going to go forward. They're obviously subject to change with COVID and the travel restrictions and everything else. We don't have any sense. I don't see any sense that the Golovkin, which was supposed to be rescheduled sometime to February, March, I don't see it on the books. So I don't know if that one got, postponed or what's happening there. Because a lot of people were looking forward to the return of Golovkin in particular, and it doesn't seem like it's on deck. Of course, he's not getting any younger, so if he's kind of out of the game, not retired, but out of the game in 2022, he's going to become slim pickings for somebody else to kind of swoop up a name and take him out, which nobody wants to see. Somebody like Charlo will come in and say, okay, let's fight now, and then stops him, and then, we stopped Golovkin, despite the fact that Golovkin he's older now. So it's kind of disappointing he wasn't able to get any work in, and hopefully he does get a fight booked in the first quarter, because I think it's important. The other one I don't see, and I didn't expect to see it necessarily, but I was hoping, was Errol Spence and Yordenis Ugas. We were hoping that would happen sometime in March. I don't see it booked in March. Spence said April. but it doesn't seem like we have a firm date as of right now. And of course, places like NSB, you're kind of pissed off that Spence isn't fighting Crawford. Of course, Crawford and the PBC management are at odds because, you just had Crawford's promoter not that long ago go on the air and say, with all the money he's burnt on Terrence Crawford, he could have bought a house in Beverly Hills, nice house. And so now there's this belief that Crawford's basically pricing himself out. I know certain people up there don't want to hear that, but it's the truth because allegedly, this is what's reported, Crawford wants like 10 million for that fight. Spence wants 10 million, but Spence is the A side coming in with 2 belts. So Spence's demands are Spence's demands, and we should accept them because he has 2 belts. And he's the draw. He drew over 300,000 against Sean Porter. The reports are that Crawford drew only 135,000 against that same Porter. So that tells us it's not Porter that's really the draw. It's Spence as far as the common opponent. They were dialing in to see Spence. And because Spence has a big Texas following, specifically Dallas, but other parts of Texas and Las Vegas, he's able to pull in major players and major money. Crawford can't draw, as Spence would like to say, he can't sell at a family reunion. So this is what we're seeing now with a guy who doesn't draw any money, but he's demanding A-side money when he doesn't draw. And so what the PBC management has said is you got to figure out a way to pay these guys, but also pay the networks and everybody else. And we are assuming that you can draw. Some people said, well, wait a minute. You pay $10 million to Caleb Plant to fight Canelo Alvarez. Well, yes, Canelo versus Plant sold, I think, 800,000 buys. So there was major money in play. And I guarantee you the vast majority of that came from Canelo's fan base. So if you're a draw, you can demand money because you pull money in. You draw money. Spence can demand it because he's going to pull the fans in. Spence is not going to give of his pocket to Crawford, who doesn't draw. So NSB and others have to come to a reality set that when you draw money, you're going to make money. If you don't draw money, it's harder for you to make money, regardless of the fact that Arum was throwing money at him like crazy, and the lawsuit exposed some of the paydays he was getting. I think they said he got $6 million for Khan, which is nuts to me, because that one didn't draw at all. That was the whole reason that Spence went on the presser and said, every time Crawford I pay for you, he did 100,000 buys. I ain't worried about him. So he doesn't draw, but he's asking for A-side money. And there's only really one right answer as of right now. There's one right answer, which is Crawford has to come down off the demands. He has to take inspiration from Floyd when he fought Oscar De La Hoya and say, whatever terms you want, I don't care. Make a decent payday. I'm not likely to push back on it as long as it's not pennies. Make a decent pay offer, and let's make this happen because I'm going to beat you and become the A side, because I recognize you have 2 belts. I only have 1. I want 3, and in order to do that, I'm willing to take a pay cut. But, of course, some people call him no pay cut Crawford because he refused to take a pay cut. He went up on the air and said, 60-40 to me or no fight. I'm paraphrasing. But when you do that and you're the B side, you're not going to get any traction. And that's why he's having a hard time finding a promoter. And that's why he's hard time finding a fight as a free agent, because nobody wants to play that game. I said it before. People aren't going to put up with Bomack's crap, and they're not going to put up with Crawford's crap. Arum barely did, and that's what caused him to go nuts and almost have a heart attack on the air, going on the Atlantic, trashing Crawford openly, which basically ruined any opportunity for him to get on a promotion. So at some point there has to be some coming down to earth, and I don't know what that's going to take, because Crawford's head's been bigged up because of these oversized paychecks he's been receiving, and he doesn't seem to recognize he's not going to get that unless he comes back down to earth and realizes you got to beat the A side, and then you'll earn those paydays. But you waited too long. We're talking years before you got to the point that you stepped up to a true threat. And yes, you performed against that threat, but you were getting outboxed up through round 10. Yes, you got the stoppage, but that's not the only thing important. We got to also look at the totality of the performance, and it's clear that the guy's declining. Okay, well, if he goes in there against Spence, and Spence beats him like he beat Danny Garcia, NSB will just say, well, Spence aged him out. No, what's happened is that Crawford sat on his laurels for too darn long, and as a result, it's hard for him to make a case for the promoters to pay him more and pay him what he wants. They'll pay him, but it's basically going to be at this point like a 70-30 split, and he has to be okay with that. In the short term, go in there and prove that you are better than this man. Take the titles, and when you got 3 belts, now you're the A side. Now you can call the shots. Until that happens, and you're falling behind, dude, because if Spence and Yordenis Ugas get signed, I'm not sure 100% that Spence beats Ugas, but regardless, if that fight has a winner, as I suspect it will, you're going to have somebody holding three belts, and that person's going to be the A side. And you're really going to have to, you're falling behind. So it's going to be even harder for you to justify payday. That's why you kind of have to take desperate measures to get in front of those fans and prove that you're better than this guy that they like. And that's how you make yourself known to the boxing world. It's not about ESPN calling you number one pound for pound, or NSB calling you number one pound for pound, or NSB saying PBC is racist, which makes no sense, or any of this. None of that matters. At the end of the day, you've got to put yourself out there and sometimes take a cut to get in front of those fights to prove yourself. That's what Ugas is going to have to do himself, because he has one belt too. He's going to have to take the lesser payday for the chance to be the A side. And he's doing it smart, because it seems like that one's moving forward. It's just taking a while. And if that one gets signed, it just further proves that Crawford's not being realistic. Because if you can make a fight with Ugas and you can't make a fight with Crawford, something's wrong, because Ugas is not a draw either. Ugas just fought Manny Pacquiao. That fight barely did 150,000 buys, if I recall. So we know that regardless of the star power in the ring, people didn't want to see Manny versus Ugas. They wanted to see Manny versus Spence, because Spence is the bigger draw than Ugas. Ugas was perceived to be a soft touch. Nobody expected Ugas to completely outbox Manny Pacquiao like he did. Okay, well, now his stock has risen a little bit, and when he goes up against Spence, we'll look at the payday. If he's able to pull at least 300,000 buys against Yordenis Ugas when Manny couldn't do it, you've got to recognize this guy as a top player draw in Errol Spence. You've got to do it. And Crawford has to be recognized as a B-side, and he's got to accept B-side pay to make the fight happen. Go in there and prove what you say is true. Let's not go off of the Porter situation, because Porter was never hurt by what happened, and Kenny Porter's who stopped it. It is a legitimate win, but it's not a pound-for-pound performance, because you got outboxed up to round 10. So I'm gunning for that fight to happen, but it's got to be on realistic terms. Meanwhile, guys like Virgil Ortiz, they're moving forward with their careers. Guys like Amir Khan and Kell Brook are making fights happen that we didn't think would ever happen. Guys like Errol Spence and Yordenis Ugas are trying to make stuff happen. And then you got a whole host of other ones that don't have a fight, and I suspect they're going to be fighting in 2022 with the Blair Cobbs of the world. You got Conor Benn, who's asking. You got Josh Taylor, who might move up. You got a lot more smoke coming your way, and you're wasting your prime. So let's see what happens at welterweight. But, you know, to me, the lesser classes this is their step-up moment. This year is the time for them to step up and show that they're still here in the boxing situation. And as it stands, there's kind of a lull, because with Wilder, he's kind of on the fence. He doesn't know if he's going to continue going. And without his excitement, without his go-after-it type mentality, we don't see that much in the heavyweight division. We see guys like Chisora, but he's kind of on the way out. He's still fighting, but he's kind of on the way out mentally. Dillian White's not a threat. We know he's not a threat. Big Baby Miller's trying to get back into it, but the PED scandals kind of hurt his situation. You got Joshua and Usyk potentially going to have a rematch. However, Lennox Lewis thinks that Joshua's going to take a step aside. If he doesn't take a step aside, what's that going to look like? But Joshua Usyk, the first one, wasn't any kind of exciting. It went the way people expected it was going to go. But Joshua fought weird, and he admitted he was trying to prove that he can box, which is stupid, because he's listened to social media instead of what he needed to do, which is to go out there and be what he is. So we're not impressed by any of the fights that are there. Don't get me started on stupid Frank Sanchez. We're not impressed by the current eras of boxers that we have, and many of the good ones are starting to be on the way out. We're starting to see some young ones coming in, but it's harder for them to make inroads because they're not able to get the fights against the true A sides across the board. The only one who's really pushing the envelope these days is Canelo Alvarez. Well, put that in perspective. This is the same guy that fought freaking Jose Cotto and got rocked by Jose Cotto. Yes, he's young, but the point is, you contrast that with where he is now. That's progress. That's improvement. He's worked to try to get better at his craft, and he's been successful at doing so, to the point that even for Canelo, I don't even think the belts matter for him. He's going to draw money regardless because he's Canelo. That's where every fighter should strive to be. And he learned well from Floyd Mayweather, who, that's my transition. Floyd Mayweather, I mentioned on a previous update, is trying to get back into exhibitions. Apparently, he's going to be trying to fight in Dubai a guy by the name of, on social media, called Money Kicks. If you're like, who? And I initially I did the same thing. Money Kicks is a guy. There was a video some years ago where Floyd was out in Vegas, and he's driving around and he's with this guy that's an Indian guy. And I didn't know anything about this dude, but apparently he came into a lot of money. Either he inherited it or he got crypto, something, some investment, some way. He came into a lot of money, and that he met Floyd by something, and they were riding around together. This was a long time ago. And I didn't know this Money Kicks apparently is the same guy. Well, it seems like that the exhibition is purported to be this against this Money Kicks guy for Floyd. And the reason that I knew it was Money Kicks and all, I didn't even follow it, but Logan Paul chimed in because Logan Paul is friends with this Money Kicks dude because they're all rich, right? And said, okay, Money Kicks, you're not going to beat Floyd. He's going to knock you out. He's going to try to knock you out like he did Tenshin Nasukawa because he failed to knock Logan out. And so he has something he feels like he wants to prove by knocking somebody out in their home country like Nasukawa. I don't see there's a bad argument to be made there because knowing Floyd, he might feel like, okay, I got to give the fans a knockout because I didn't give a knockout here and I wasn't able to do it Logan. So let's go ahead and do it with somebody else in their home country. Meanwhile, I can take all these millions from these people up in Dubai and just walk away with an easy check and do the money dance after the fact. I can see Floyd doing that. I can absolutely see him being that petty. If he does, all it's going to do is cause people like NSB to come out and say, well, but you're ducking Logan on the rematch. You're ducking Jake. You never fought him. You're not fighting real fighters, and so on and such. And they don't recognize it's all exhibitions for him now. He doesn't want to do the pro record stuff. He doesn't want to go for titles. He doesn't need to test himself because he's already done what he needed to do. Accomplishment-wise, he's a draw. So if he's able to go in there and basically play around for a few rounds and get it done and still collect a check, I mean, more power to him. Let him do it because he's at that point. Anybody who would be at his level would do the same thing. Anybody who criticizes him, we know for a fact, if you were in his situation, you do the same thing. Do as little as possible, but make as much as possible. As far as Floyd goes, he's apparently having fun with what he's doing because he's in control of what he's doing and how he's doing and where he does it. And he's getting a check for his name brand recognition alone, even in somewhat advanced age. I think he's like 44, 45 by now. So, I mean, imagine that. He's making tons of money doing less work. He's making just about as much money as somebody like The Rock, doing way less risk, way less time investment. All he has to do is go around there and basically play, and he's pulling a check for $30 million. I mean, come on, that's crazy. The Rock has to spend hours on set, hours rehearsing, hours practicing. He has to train like nuts. He has to keep himself healthy, all so that he can make however many millions he does. And yes, he's highest paid, but Floyd has to do it only for a few minutes, and he's making those same millions. That's the difference. And anybody should be giving kudos to Floyd for being able to convince these dudes out in Dubai to pay for that. Think about that for a minute. So I think 2022 is going to be an interesting year for the sport of boxing in general. We still don't have an answer as far as Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. and, Anderson Silva and Tommy Fury and all these other things going on. Jake Paul said he was going to take a little bit of a break because he's been kind of going full throttle, but he still wanted to potentially have a fight with Julio Cesar Chavez. We don't know if that's going. I know it's weird me covering that, but the reason I'm covering it now is because I suspect that the novelty of those types of fights is kind of wearing off as well. I think Jake Paul will still be able to pull numbers and get people in, but from what I understood, his last fight, the rematch against Woodley, didn't draw nearly as much as his first fights or his earlier fights with Nate Robinson, etc. And so the novelty may be wearing off, but also I think people are waiting for him to fight a boxer, a true boxer. So that may be on deck in 2022. We'll have to watch out for that one because if he's able to spark out a real boxer, he's going to get called out by a lot of people. And at some point, Canelo's going to come knocking and start saying, I want to fight you. And that one's going to draw huge. As much as it's going to piss off boxing fans, it would draw huge to have Jake Paul, as huge as he is, fighting Canelo Alvarez and watch Canelo Alvarez put the dude to sleep, because that's exactly what I think would happen. Either that or shatter his face like he did Billy Juice Saunders. So that's my daily update for this weekend of boxing. Again, I'm not And the reason I talked about a lot of different things is because I'm really not impressed by Joe Smith and Steve Geffrard. Maybe if you're a Joe Smith fan, it's something to watch. I'm not going to say it's going to be an exciting fight at all, but maybe, who knows? Maybe Geffrard shows up and pulls a Buster Douglas. I just don't see it, man. The dude lost to two straight bums. Bums. Take a look at the record. Take a look at those fights. They were bums that he should not have lost to. And so I don't have much hope for that fight. And so I'm not really excited about this weekend's of boxing. I'm generally excited about 2022, just not this weekend. Hope that's it. Go ahead and like and subscribe. I don't do the flashy nonsense, but you know where to find the stuff. And follow for some digital updates, because next weekend I will be covering for sure Mr. Gary Russell Jr. coming back. I'll definitely be covering that one. And then I'll have some more information. Hopefully the undercard for that one will have some more information to talk about, and some of these returns that I keep talking about.